It's day 67. We had abnormally strong winds at night around this neighborhood, and that had me worried for my new transplanted seedlings. As you can see here, the palm fronds of these queen palms are just swinging all over the place. The Joshua tree is completely unfazed. The guava is pretty tough, so nothing's going to happen to that. And this cherry of the Rio Grande is not really big enough to be affected anyway. So on the previous day, just one day after that transplant that you saw at the end of the previous episode, the second episode on day 65, the seedlings were looking to be in dire straits. Everything was wilting except for maybe the two biggest ones, well, maybe three. I don't know, but that one in the background, the tip looks wilted, so I think that might be a goner. This one looks like it still has some hope. So it's mainly that large, tallest one, and this one just looks sad. So it's amazing how devastating a transplant can be for your seedlings in just 48 hours. And I think the wind, in all things considered, is not really a factor here. I mean, sure, some leaves could blow off. I mean, that does look kind of scary for just a singular gust like that over a few seconds, but I think these should survive. They should be strong enough. It is worrisome, but I'm more worried about whatever kind of like fungal wilt or other ailments are besetting my seedlings, at least 4 out of 7 of them. So it's day 72. So the situation has stabilized, but the ones that have this wilting problem don't look any better. So I looked back at episodes 1 and 2 just to review what I've done, since it's been a really long time between episode 2 and episode 3. This episode covers a really long time span, and looking back at the footage, most of what's in this pot is just potting mix. It has some California hill dirt, clay dirt in there, and some sand, but by volume and by mass, it's really not a lot. And I think I won't be using potting mix going forward. It's just a terrible growing medium. There are so many flaws with potting mix, and if you've used it before to grow other plants, my general review is that it's just not good, especially as you go by with the years and you keep trying to reuse the same potting mix. So in the future, I'll avoid using this and I'll just get a fresh start. I'll get fresh dirt and mix it with sand or some other kind of composition. So it's day 78. It's apparent that all but the biggest seedling are doomed. There are some little weed seedlings coming out, germinating from all the watering. Don't be fooled by the dry appearance of the surface. If you dig just a little bit underneath, it's wet. So that's just the nature of potting mix. So I think these have all succumbed to some sort of fungal infection, very akin to my honey mango seed, which never got a second episode because the moment I transplanted it, it died within 48 hours. So somehow this central seedling, the biggest one, has survived. It has a very thin stem that sort of resembles like a micro bamboo. It has that kind of a look to it. I hope it gets thicker. It doesn't seem to have much structural support otherwise with such a thin stem. So as long as I can buttress it with dirt and sand and potting mix, it should be fine, but I'm hoping it can develop into something much more robust. It's not that I always try to have plant growing series with these fruit trees and just end up with one specimen in some kind of survival of the fittest scheme in which I select just one champion from all these seedlings. I think this pot is definitely big enough for 7 seedlings of pomegranate to grow pretty big before I would have to cull some or do yet more transplants. So I'm watering into this mix and it's not looking promising, and I'm probably just promoting even more fungal growth and whatnot, but I figure since this sole survivor at this point is seemingly in stasis It's not really growing fast, but it seems to be growing a little bit at least. New leaves are coming out. And by day 96, it looks really bleak. So despite all the watering I did, they all burned to a crisp, seemingly. And I pretty much chalk that up to, fungal disease. The root system's just all closed up, and basically no amount of water could get up there. So there are some weed seedlings coming out. Lots of seedlings look the same. I'm always wondering if these are residual cantaloupe seeds or some other plants that I've sowed in the past in seed form. So I'm wondering if these are just remnants of seeds that have been dormant for a long time as this pot was dry. And eventually I watered, and some of them are coming, they're coming out of the ground, they're germinating. So time will tell, but again, I feel like this growing medium is actually a lot poorer than appearances would suggest from episode 2 of this series. It seemed like I was mixing a lot of sand in there, but in reality, that sand was not a huge percentage of the entire mass. Certainly, I didn't mix it all the way to the bottom of this very deep pot, and it's a very wide pot too. So there seems to be some growth with some new true leaves coming out for this Soul Survivor. It's very spindly, and it's time to just get rid of the junk. No point in having this around. So, yeah, having rotting roots in there will only contribute to the problem. So, a long time ago, there was a YouTube channel, I believe, or a website. I think it was a YouTube channel where there was this nursery owner in Orange County. I think he's Japanese, but he had very good theories that I agree with more and more about how potting mix is just essentially just bad. It's plants just having their roots sitting in rotting plant corpses, decaying and giving off harmful gases and other byproducts and growing mold. Versus if you look at the soil out there, like when I dug up California hill soil, clay soil in my neighborhood, it's true that it's really just 1% organic matter by mass, maybe even less. So there is some organic matter there in natural dirt, but it's not a huge amount. And by mixing in sand, you can just increase the drainage. Clay soil can have lots of problems with drainage and root penetration if it just hardens into this like clay-like mass. So it's day 105, and as you can see, this thing is barely hanging on. Some of the weed seedlings are gone, and 2 persist. So they're having trouble growing too. So that's a really bad sign, because weeds are typically very hardy, and they should be doing well, better than the main plants actually. So it's day 115. So I've already covered the topic of potting mix being terrible, and I don't feel like there's much I can do. I could try to transplant my lone seedling. At this point, I'm not feeling great about this plant growing series. I do feel like given enough time, this could recover. I have had plants that successfully can grow in potting mix, such as the sweet Annie, the sweet wormwood. That took forever to take off. By day 50, it was a tiny little nothing weed, kind of like something you'd see in the middle of the desert east of here, 30, 40 miles. And then eventually it grew to become the biggest plant I ever had and the thirstiest plant. So it's possible, but I'm not feeling very hopeful at this point. So it's day 130, and this is mostly potting mix, and there's a lot of bugs lately, so I'm just treating with a little bit of imidacloprid. I have to keep reshaping that little tiny hill that buttresses the pomegranate seedling, and that weed has survived. And now it's day 149. It's been a very long time since the last episode of day 65 at the end. I'm only doing a fractional transplant today and showing you how this thing suddenly took off. I think it takes a long time for roots to get established in poor growing mediums like this. So in the future, if I do a transplant, I'll do it to sort of a half sand, half clay soil mixture, like with mango and some other things that I've been trying to grow lately, because that's worked really well for germinating seedlings, at least for fruit trees. And this is not quite the same as a mango plant, but I figure it will also do reasonably well. And this weed, like I alluded to earlier, it should be growing faster than a fruit tree growing in its sort of a, I guess they can grow in California, but I'm pretty sure it's native to Iran or whatever. It's not, or ancient Persia. It's not meant to be growing in a place like this, I don't think. At least not in potting mix. So I figure a local weed would do better in its native climate. And the reason I haven't pulled this is because it adds a little bit of interest to the series. And it's still cold in May of 2019 in San Diego. It's oddly cold. May is typically the month of May gray. There's a lot of marine layer, and hence it's typically overcast and maybe a little chilly because of that, but it's been downright cold in 2019 in San Diego County and much of California. So I'm not doing a full transplant. I'm only carving away by hand the potting mix that I can around the base, the top of the root system at the base of the stem. And I'm going to replace that with a half sand, half soil mixture to see if that can at least provide some structure. I know the important part is actually where all the new roots are growing, the root tips, both the lateral and the tap root, way down there where we can't see. So that needs to get into a better place, not the stuff at the base of where the root system starts. So I'm not expecting this to help all that much, but perhaps it could provide some help because it will be touching the root system, and after I water it will sift, kind of make its way down there, although I don't know by how deep. So hopefully things will improve a little bit. I think since it's starting to take off now, it really doesn't matter that much. It's just that I'd like for this thing to grow a lot more before I attempt another transplant. And I figure by having this big tall weed next to it, it could actually help a little bit. It could help use up some water and take the heat off my main target in terms of, bugs and fungi that can be attacking the root systems of both plants. So I'm creating this little hill. I'm burying it, all the half sand, half soil mixture with the potting mix at the edges to create this little hill to buttress everything. I buried a few of the leaves of this tall weed. So I expect the weed to explode and just flower at some point. I don't know what species that is. If you know, please say something in the comments. I'm doing some limited watering here, and that'll be it. I expect the pomegranate seedling to take off because its root system is now established. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for a fourth episode.